The movie kicks off by introducing us to a man named Lee No. He works as a skilled car mechanic at the local police garage, but is currently hospitalized. Shortly after, we meet Julia, a dedicated leader of a narcotics crime squad within the same police department where Lee No works. Julia informs Lee No that Ariski, a corrupt cop, has escaped and left his wife and child behind. She pledges to capture Ariski and bring him to justice. Lee No, upon hearing this, advises Julie that to catch Ariski, but she must locate Marco, another corrupt officer who was Ariski's partner in crime. Lee No had previously confronted Marco, beaten him, and handcuffed him for killing Quentin, Lee No's younger brother. However, Julia reveals that when she arrived at the scene, Marco was gone and he had managed to escape. Lee No is shocked by this news and suspects that someone helped Marco flee. He vows to find, apprehend, and exact revenge on Marco. After leaving the hospital, Julia encounters Moss, a woman in charge of the police investigation department. It is revealed that Marco was taken into custody by the police under Moss's orders. Julia was present during Marco's arrest, but did not disclose this information to Lee No. 6 months later, Lee No continues his relentless search for Ariski while frequently keeping an eye on Ariski's wife, Stella. Stella is well aware of Lee No's surveillance and repeatedly pleads with him to stay away. One night, Lee No finds himself observing Stella's residence. However, to his surprise, police officers under Julia's command are also conducting surveillance there. Shortly after, these officers receive an emergency call about a shooting happening elsewhere, prompting them to leave their post. Not long after, several individuals approach Stella's house. 3 of them force their way inside, with one person standing guard outside. Lee No cannot simply stand by and watch when he witnesses this unfolding. Later, the police arrive and successfully arrest the criminals. Julia meets with Lee No, who hopes that she will involve him in the mission to locate and apprehend Ariski. At first, Julia hesitates, questioning Lee No's suitability for the task, given that he is merely a mechanic at the police garage. However, she has a change of heart and extends an invitation to Lee No to join their efforts. Julia then provides him with the keys to Cheris's car, allowing him to swiftly reach the police repair garage where Cheris's vehicle is stored. The car still bears visible bullet holes on the windshield and dashboard, serving as a grim reminder that Cheris was shot and killed by Ariski inside the car. 1 year has passed, and Lee No has become an integral part of Julia's police team. They are gearing up for a mission to pursue a drug importer. Lee No has personally modified Cheris's car, changing its color from red to blue, and they plan to use this vehicle for their operation. Their mission proves successful as they manage to apprehend their target. During this operation, they cross paths with a Spanish border patrol officer named Alvaro. He shares with Lee No that Cheris was a close friend of his and expresses his condolences for Quentin's tragic death. Alvaro hopes that Marco and Ariski, both notorious for eluding the Spanish police while smuggling drugs, will be captured soon, as they are wanted fugitives in Spain. Lee No then assures Alvaro that he will notify them if he succeeds in capturing Marco and Ariski. Upon returning to their headquarters, Stella arrives to pick up Lee No, revealing that they are now in a romantic relationship. Not long after, another group of police officers from the Narcotics Division, led by Yuri, have been dispatched by the head of the Narcotics Bureau, who is determined to see Marco eliminated. Yuri is tasked with carrying out this mission at the location where the police are keeping Marco hidden. However, Yuri is hesitant to take on this risky job and devises a plan to have Lee No go to the location, knowing that Lee No is eager to confront Marco. The next day, Lee No focusing on modifying his cars, and he receives an unexpected phone call from someone claiming to be his foster mother's caregiver. They inform Lee No that his foster mother is seriously ill and provide him with her address, urging him to visit her. Lee No decides to follow the address given by the caller, believing it to be his mother's location. However, to his surprise, when he arrives, he discovers that it's the very place where Marco is being hidden by Moss and Julie A. Moss, monitoring this situation through remote CCTV. urgently notifies Julia to rush to the location before Lee No reaches Marco. Not long after, Lee No stumbles upon Marco at the hiding spot. While at the location, Lee No notices an electronic tracking anklet on Marco's leg, revealing that Marco had been secretly placed there by Moss, Julia, and the police. When Julia arrives, it's too late as Lee No has already taken Marco into custody, intending to interrogate him about Ariski's whereabouts. Lee No expresses his frustration at being deceived for a year and angrily questions why this happened. Moss inquires about the source of Lee No's information, and he explains it came from a mysterious phone call. Marco suspects that the caller might be working on behalf of the head of the Narcotics Bureau, Captain Alexander Ress, who wants Lee No to seek revenge by killing Marco. As it turns out, Moss had been hiding Marco because he was a crucial witness in Captain Alexander Ress's involvement in drug smuggling. Lee No then questions why Captain Alexander Ress hasn't been immediately arrested. Moss explains that the evidence against him isn't strong enough yet, relying solely on the testimonies of Ariski and Marco. Lee No decides not to kill Marco, instead wanting him to face accountability for what he did to Lee No's adopted brother. Moss also clarifies that Marco will remain in the witness protection program and cannot be jailed. After carefully considering his options, Lee No made the decision to hand Marco over to the Spanish police for a fair trial. As he was about to do so, Yuri and his team appeared, following orders from Captain Alexander Ress. They intended to take Marco to provide a lead for the Narcotics Bureau in capturing Ariski. Moss tried to resist their actions, but Yuri's group forcefully took Marco. Suddenly, an explosion occurred, allowing Lee No to rescue Marco from their grasp. Lee No quickly contacted Alvaro for assistance in securing Marco's safety. Meanwhile, Julia received word from Moss that Lee No had successfully taken Marco away. Moss implored Julia to prevent Lee No from handing Marco over to the Spanish police. Lee No continued his desperate efforts to elude the police patrol cars that were closing in on him. At the same time, Alvaro came up with a clever plan, utilizing a pest control box truck, and arranged to meet Lee No at their predetermined location, while Julia remained in pursuit of Lee No. Despite successfully evading capture for a while, Lee No found himself chased through the streets under a bridge, with Julia hot on his trail. Julia decided to continue the pursuit in her colleague's car and reached out to Lee No, urging him to stop. Lee No, determined not to let Marco escape again, expressed his frustration and anger towards Julia for not being truthful about Marco. However, Juliet explained that she had no choice but to follow Moss's orders. On the other hand, Yuri received a phone call from Captain Alexander Ress, who instructed Yuri to eliminate Marco before the Spanish police could apprehend him. Back with Lee No, he successfully evaded Julia and her colleague, allowing him to continue his escape without further pursuer. Alvaro and his colleague were on their way to the pre-arranged meeting point. Shortly after, Lee No arrived at the meeting place, while Julia and her colleague, who had reached a border checkpoint, lost track of him. Lee No wasted no time in opening the trunk and removing Marco. Just as they were doing so, Alvaro arrived on the scene, and they swiftly placed Marco inside the car. Alvaro assured Lee No that Marco would face trial in Spain, and Lee No warned Alvaro to be vigilant on the road, as not only Julia but also Yuri and his team were after Marco's life. At the same time, Julia received a report that Lee No's car was on his way to the main road and was being pursued by the French police. Upon hearing this, Julia immediately gave chase. Eventually, she managed to intercept Lee No, demanding that he surrender and open the trunk to release Marco. However, the trunk was empty. She reported that all vehicles passing through the border were undergoing thorough inspections in the search for Marco. At the same time, Alvaro and his colleague, who had not been far behind, decided to change course and head toward the port. Julia's colleague, who witnessed the events, quickly informed Julia of what had happened. Julia immediately instructed her colleague to set up an inspection point near the port. However, she soon received the news that Captain Alexander Ress's subordinates had already established a checkpoint in the same area. Faced with this information, Julia urgently tried to contact Alvaro. Meanwhile, not far from the scene, Alvaro and his colleague had spotted two armed officers. Alvaro managed to contact Julia, who warned them about the imminent danger. Julia requested that they turn back, as Captain Alexander Rez's team intended to kill Marco, which would also put Alvaro and his colleague at risk. Unfortunately, there was no way to retreat. In desperation, Alvaro called Julia for assistance. Upon hearing his plea, Lino prepared his modified vehicle for action. Julia assured Alvaro that they would catch up soon. As Alvaro and his colleague continued to be pursued and fired upon by Captain Alexander Rez's subordinates, Julia arrived to lend her support. She did her best to keep them from getting closer to Alvaro's car. Shortly thereafter, Lino arrived and took action. With Lino's help, they successfully rescued Marco. Afterward, Julia departed from the scene. However, Lino couldn't simply stand by and watch. He attempted to disable Julia's car, but ended up causing a collision with his own vehicle. Julia stopped her car and approached Lino. Later, Julia's colleague arrived and promptly arrested Lino. However, at Julia's request, her colleague released Lino, considering that Marco had already been secured. Despite this, Moss's orders still required Lino to be detained. Not long after, they spotted a vehicle approaching from a distance, and it was Yuri and his subordinates. They immediately opened fire, reigniting the intense battle. In the chaos, Marco quickly made his escape, taking Lino with him, while Julia and her colleagues stood their ground. Yuri and his companions attempted to chase them down, but suddenly, Alvaro arrived and began firing shots. Inside Lino's vehicle, he continued to fight Marco as Julia raced to catch up with them. The speeding car eventually crashed into a tree, but miraculously, both of them survived the collision. Lino quickly seized the opportunity and spirited Marco away from the crash site. Thirsty and needing a drink, Lino left Marco, who had fainted momentarily. But suddenly, Marco regained consciousness and stabbed Lino from behind. At the same time, the residents of a nearby farmhouse witnessed the scene and were chased by Marco. Julia then contacted her colleague for assistance. Despite his injuries, Lino managed to get up, seize Julia's weapon, and shoot Marco in the head. When Spanish police officers arrived at the scene, they secured both Lino and Marco. During the interrogation led by Moss, she expressed her frustration that a year's worth of work had gone to waste due to Marco's death. Julia, who had been tasked with protecting Marco, decided to quit the police force, worn down by the weight of all the deceit and turmoil. The scene then shifted to an old car workshop, where a mysterious figure on a motorcycle arrived, and it was Ariski, the most wanted person. He took some tools that once belonged to Cheris, previously used by Lino. Ariski then purchased an old car from the workshop and used it to make his escape from the area. The end. Moral lesson from the story: don't answer calls from unknown numbers. It may be a trap to make you the unintentional scapegoat and lose all your efforts after years of pursuing.